us. And we have had various events, sometimes each semester, that engage academic leaders, scholars, and educators who are having a broad impact on our systems at large. And we have engaged in dialogue with our students, with our colleagues externally as well. So this year, given that we are having to change our modality and how we interact, we're actually very pleased to be able to reach out to our friends and our alumni particularly. And we thought that no better than to actually invite some of our leaders in our own Connecticut school system who are owls, who are alum, and have a lot of experience in our system, but also have had multiple degrees here at Southern. So we're very proud of the people here today. And I just want to give a brief introduction before handing it over to Dr. McDaniels. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Eileen Tracy, who is a superintendent of New Haven Public Schools. Dr. Tracy is a veteran educator in the New Haven Public Schools for over 37 years. She is the new superintendent of the schools after years of serving in various capacities: teacher, assistant principal, principal, director of instruction, assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction, and assistant superintendent of instructional leadership. Dr. Tracy is a graduate of the Northern Caribbean University and a graduate of Southern Connecticut State University, earning the following degrees and certifications: Bachelor's in Early Childhood Ed, a Master's in Reading, a 6th year in Reading Consultant, a 6th year in Educational Leadership, and a doctorate in Educational Leadership. Amazing collection she is. I don't even know how to say what a 5 owls is, but it's wonderful to have Dr. Tracy here, and I've really enjoyed working with you in recent years to establish our Obama University School here on our campus, which is an amazing feat, and we look forward to working closely with you. Second, I'd like to introduce Dr. Charles DeMay. Chip DeMay is the Executive Director of the Cooperative Educational Services, one of 6 regional educational services in Connecticut. He's a native of Connecticut. He began his career in education 3 decades ago as a science teacher in Hingham, Connecticut. He has proudly taught physics and calculus to thousands of students, chaired a science department, served an assistant principal in Westport, Connecticut, led Newtown High School in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, as its principal from 2008 to 2014, and has served as superintendent of the Amity Regional School District. He's earned bachelor's and master's degrees in physics from RPI, advanced degrees and certificates from Southern Connecticut State University and UConn, and a doctorate in educational leadership from Central. I thank Dr. Chip DeMay. He has served on our superintendent's network for many years, and he's also now chairing our external advisory board. It's been a pleasure working with you, Chip, and you're always ready to help Southern in its educational endeavors. Thank you. And I finally wish to introduce Hamlet Hernandez. He started as superintendent of Brantford Public Schools in August 2010. Mr. Hernandez's undergraduate and graduate work was completed at Southern Connecticut State University as well. As a professional educator, his practical experiences extend from elementary level to central office administration. His work has ranged from developing curriculum, policy development, budget preparation, school construction, and most recently connecting the Common Core state standards to his district's work around teacher practice and supervision. Superintendent Hernandez has also served in the United States Marine Corps 1982 to 2004 as a military officer. Thank you, sir, for your service. He has won numerous awards for his accomplishments in the field of education, and recently we have developed another partnership under his leadership with Brantford Public Schools and establishing a new cohort of students there in Brantford. Thank you, all 3 of you, for joining us today as proud alums. And finally, I wish to introduce Dr. Cynthia McDaniels, who began her career as a Peace Corps volunteer expert in curriculum and teaching in Southern Africa, and continued to be associated with the US government volunteer agency Action in Washington, DC, as a program evaluator, later returning to Southern Africa as an advisor and consultant. While pursuing her PhD, she was recruited to address racial and Ethnic Problems in Howard County, Maryland, where she conducted and institutionalized a professional development program for teachers. Upon completion of her PhD, Dr. McDaniels accepted a position as a lecturer and later promoted to senior lecturer at a regional university in Southern Africa, University of Botswana. Dr. McDaniels established herself as an ethnographic researcher, evaluation expert, and served as a curriculum consultant for the World Confederation of the Teaching Professions in Switzerland. Dr. McDaniels has taught at universities in Maryland, California, and Connecticut. She has presented at local, state, regional, national, and international conferences on multiple topics, including social justice, international education, curriculum, teacher leadership, women in higher ed, equity, student achievement, and many more. Her current activities include community service projects, minority recruitment, curriculum, and alumni engagement. And she's presently the chair of the Educational Leadership and Policy Studies Department here at Southern, and has been at Southern since 1997. We have a wonderful group of people here, wonderful diverse set of experiences and leadership. I'm very proud for us to introduce each of our alums today, and I'm going to now hand it over to Dr. McDaniels to lead the colloquium today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, for the very warm welcome. I too celebrate our alumni. We have some outstanding leaders with us today, and as soon as we get started, you'll see just how proud and why we're so proud of them. I just wanted to say a few words about Stephen. I kind of like to introduce him. He joined us as dean here at Southern in 2014. Prior to that, he was at the University of Massachusetts, the Dartmouth College campus, as a full professor of math and math education. He also was a research fellow and lecturer at Oxford University in the United Kingdom. While at UMass, he was a founding director of the Caput Center for Research and Innovation and STEM. And he led many investigations, principal investigators as the private foundations for the National Science Foundation and the US Department of Education. He's done so much since he's arrived at Southern, and it will emerge as we continue our conversation. Today, I wanted to emphasize the importance of social justice. We are a social justice institution, and we take our designation very seriously. And as we proceed today, we have 75 minutes to have a conversation, which is what a colloquy does. It comes from the Latin colloquial, which means collective talk. So we're going to collectively talk together and have a conversation about the challenges school leaders face, especially in terms of race, diversity, and social justice. The Reverend Martin Luther King said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy." We certainly are living in challenging times. So moving forward, I will ask our educators several questions, the challenges that they face as leaders and in their districts. I will ask each person a question and they will answer. Once they complete their answer, I will open it up to the remaining leaders to comment or provide examples or say whatever they feel they can to further elaborate on the question. So without any further ado, I'd like to begin with Dr. Dumais. Dr. Dumais, in times of such rapid change and challenge, how does a leader ensure that results are likely to have a high degree of sustainability?
Thank you, Cynthia. If anybody has ever been to or seen a faculty meeting or a board meeting where there was a conversation that lasted an hour or longer on if we should get out of the US school lunch program so that we could offer cookies that tasted better than the cookies that we have to offer under certain guidelines, you probably left thinking, how is it possible that times where we're dealing with such important issues, that so much time is spent on issues that aren't important? Humans are hardwired to avoid some of those hard conversations. So for sustainable solutions, you have to consider both time and space. So some things are done quickly, some things are done slowly, but I think that school leaders do a good job of addressing the time piece, but not always the space piece. We're trying to eliminate options for people to avoid conversations. And one of those options is, well, if I wait long enough, we'll have a new superintendent or a new principal or a new school leader. So we need to be what I call painfully persistent in time, as far as making sure that that conversation stays at the front. But we also need to do it in terms of space. And Cynthia, your example of the university being committed to social justice, we can't give people a place to turn to where it's not being addressed. And so many times in schools, if it's not the school and the community and the university, those who are preparing our teachers, those who are supporting our teachers, those who are in coaching our kids, if everybody is not moving in the same direction, then it gives people an opportunity to veer off. So painfully persistent in time and space.
All right, thank you very much, Chip. Dr. Tracy, school leaders are trying to swim against the rapids in very uncertain times. How can they navigate the challenges of equity in these uncertain and unprecedented times?
Thank you, Dr. McDaniels. And let me say that we are trying to survive. We are trying to swim against the current. These currents are so strong. It's more or less like you're swimming against the rapids. And especially in urban centers like mine, where there are challenges of not only equity, but there are challenges with limited resources. As leaders, we all face that. We have been talking about equity, and everyone supports equity. There's 50 million students across the United States. Half of those 50 millions are Latinos and special education students. It is an urban challenge. I'm not saying it's not in other districts, but it's more so pronounced in urban centers. There are widespread and well-documented disparities between the educational needs of these students groups and their classroom peers. It has been the subject of conversation, but yet without much of any solutions. As educators, we have to apply the equity lens in any of these situations and ask ourselves if the practices we're using are eliminating the predictability of outcomes based on race, native language, income, gender identity, and other dimensions that have traditionally been underserved by our educational systems. Equity is not the challenge. Deciding to see the patterns of inequity and do nothing is the challenge in too many of our districts. It is easier to see injustice and remain quiet than it is to speak our truth. We are in a community that encourages us to speak our truth. We have adopted equity policies in our district. We have developed citywide youth coalition, very active student groups. We're examining our curriculum to ensure that our practices are helping our students rather than further alienating them from receiving resources, a robust education, and access to college and career opportunities. We recently ensured that all our students have a one-to-one device and access to internet services. The pandemic has highlighted for us the digital divide in our districts. When we started out in this remote model, we realized that many thousands of our students were not able to be serviced. That's inequity. And so my challenge was, how do I get all of my students the devices they need? And not only that, but internet access. And not only that, but supporting the families in knowing how to access these, our programs that we have, and also training our staff for this new normal. We partner with Clifford Beers for mental health and supports for families. We partner with Yale Child Studies Center to make sure that we're supporting our families. Our youth community family engagement department was relentless in knocking at doors, even in the height of the pandemic, to make sure that our homeless are served, our undocumented immigrants are serviced, and our regular students who are challenged. We have recruitment, hiring, retention plan to ensure that our hiring practices are not discriminatory for people who come through our doors. We also have a system of magnet schools that also enhance that equity issue. But we've provided 300 buses to transport students across district and in our district, looking at how we can integrate our population and provide access to schools that are well-resourced to our families. We've utilized Alliance grants, ESSER grants, and all those things to help our schools that are lower resource. Certainly more can be done. And as educators and leaders, we have to always strive and look out for the resources that are needed to support our families and students.
Thank you very much for that very expansive and detailed response. Superintendent Hernandez, what challenges have you faced as a leader of a school district with changing demographics?
Thank you, Cynthia. As a superintendent at Branford Public Schools for just about a decade, just over a decade, I have had the opportunity to observe firsthand the challenges of a community that was very homogeneous and was experiencing changes and did not have necessarily the community awareness of the changes that were taking place. Just to give you some perspective, when I first arrived here, the free and reduced population was 10%. As I sit here before you today, it is 38%. When I first arrived in Branford, the high needs population, which is defined as my ELL population, special education, and free and reduced by the state, was at around 18%. As I sit here today, it is at 46%. Branford is commonly referred to as a quaint little shoreline town, but there is a lack of awareness that it has many, many, many challenges. And as a superintendent, and the dean had asked us to reflect on a leadership point of view, when you come in and you start to think about decision-making and how you can affect change in a district so that you can be there for all children and all families. One of the major avenues that we are able to do that through is through budget and resource allocation, and also to raise awareness. There was an incredible, at the same time that this was all happening, our enrollment was, it wasn't a precipitous decline, but it was a decline. And there was a belief that we needed to allocate resources strictly based on enrollment, and to change that dialogue in the community to have it be needs-based. And that's where the equity piece comes in, that not all of our children and all of our families needed the Branford model of the 60s and 70s, that we needed to be able to differentiate the way that we allocated resources, whether it be for our ELL population, whether we implemented a breakfast program for our students so that they would be able to be well fed and be able to access their cognition rather than have their tummies rumbling in class, whether it be specialized programming for our students on autism spectrum disorders. that we were sending out of district, and rather we needed to develop capacity so that we can keep those children in district. So in summation, the changing demographic to me, as challenging as it is in Branford, also was an opportunity to unify the community. And it was to unify the community around something that Dr. Dumais mentioned earlier around time and space. And to me, the space piece is that unity of effort. It's a multidimensional approach. It cannot just be the school district acting in a silo, but rather it's the school district taking a lead step in collaborating and facilitating cross-departmental discussions so that there is a unity of effort and there is an awareness and an acceptance of who we are as a community and what our children need in the present moment. That to me, ultimately, is a very, very big equity issue. And again, equity does not mean the same thing for everyone. So I'd like to say that in Branford, our work continues. The work now with the pandemic has, interestingly enough, the pandemic does not recognize free and reduced, does not recognize ELL, does not recognize special education. So we are now we're finding ourselves in this truly all together as we navigate this next challenge.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Hernandez. Dean Hagedis, you've heard from our school leaders. What can we do as the College of Education to support and help them navigate these challenges?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. McDaniels. And this is a very, already demonstrating a very rich set of needs, challenges, and perspectives. One of the most important things for us at the College of Education and Southern Connecticut State University, which has its history and heritage over 125 years in preparing teachers and educators, is to not to become complacent, to continue to offer high quality programming and continuously improve what we do and how we do it, so that we don't have curriculum that's dated, so that we don't have fieldwork experiences that are not meaningful. And we can only do that through very strong partnerships with our school districts and leaders. When I arrived in Connecticut, it's over 6 years ago, I felt that there was a gap, a space to continue the metaphor between higher education institutions and our pre-K-12 systems. And so, there was some finger pointing about casting blame. And I thought, what we need to do is stop that. And we need to sit around the table and we need to share, the leaders of these systems need to share what the needs are and challenges are and how we can work together. And I established a superintendent's network with the school leaders, district leaders that we work most closely with, both where our students come from and also where our graduates of our education programs are hired. And that's built over the years so that we're now working very closely. Our goals are also to co-construct fieldwork and co-construct assessments and experiences, and so that we don't see it as us and them, but really is a collaborative, which is really important, so that we are continually fine-tuning and improving what we do. Higher education institutions, have a reputation sometimes of being stuck in silos and stuck in their ways. So in education, we really need to challenge that and push that and talk and share. And I feel we've been doing a really great job at that. And finally, particularly in these uncertain times, we have to be flexible. It's a word I've been using and my colleagues have been using a lot recently. And that call for flexibility. In education, sometimes our systems, our regulations, our procedures are rigid. And we've had to break some of those down in order to do the work that's necessary. So we didn't just stop our students going out student teach. We've been thinking about alternative ways to ensure authentic learning experiences. and to continue that partnership. And finally, institutes of higher education should be in the business of creating new knowledge. I mean, that's why we're established. And this is a time for creating new knowledge and new ways of thinking about these challenges and how we address it. And as Superintendent Hernandez said, I did ask the group to think about what goes into how you make decisions, very complex decisions that need to be made. And how can we help as a knowledge creator, nearby to help and think through those important challenges and decisions. So I feel that our role and mission needs to be to continue and sustain in offering and being flexible and continually improving our works. And I feel that the faculty and staff in the College of Ed have been doing that. I'm very proud of their work and the work that we'll continue to do.
Thank you very much, Dean Hegedus. At this point, I'd like to pause and see the questions and comments that you have. Doreen, could you read a couple of the questions for us, please?
Dr. McDaniels, we do not have any questions at this time.
Oh, okay. All right, well, I have some more questions, and so I'll proceed. Dr. Dumais, what can school leaders do to decrease the gap between the percentage of students of color and the percentage of educators of color? There is a gap. How do we reduce it?
You're right, Cynthia, there is a gap. And I think that you've heard the Commissioner of Education speak of this, and it is a major issue and concern across the state. There are 25 school districts in Connecticut that have a larger than 50% difference between the percentage of students of color and the percentage of teachers of color. And students seeing people who look like them, it's been shown that it improves their educational experience. And so when we think of that pipeline for creating certified teachers, and I'll go back to what Stephen said about flexibility. 30 years ago, a little bit more, the state of Connecticut put an alternate route in place where if you came from a different path, you could still get certified and work in our schools. And so in that pipeline, that was a way to feed people into the pipeline. So we need ways to feed people into the pipeline, and we need ways to keep people from getting or escaping that pipeline. Southern has done a great job in terms of providing targeted scholarships for students who might have an inclination to go into the School of Education, but limits on their financial resources to be able to maintain a job, go to school, get certified, and teach. One of the things in that flexibility area that we're looking at as school districts and as RESCs across the state, CREC started a program just over a year ago, where instead of trying to do minority teacher recruitment, which the positive outcomes of that are limited, and instead we're trying to do minority teacher certification, where the people are already employees in a district, and we can find pathways for them where they're already familiar with and part of the culture, where they're already familiar with and part of the community, and now creating an opportunity for them to become certified. What CREC did was CREC took 12 individuals who worked at CREC, paired them with a mentor and had them go through an 18-month program while employees of CREC. And at the end of that, 11 of them, all people of color, were certified in elementary education and have jobs at CREC. So we're moving that, and we're taking that program and we're expanding it to the Learn region of Connecticut, the Eastern Shore, the CES region of Connecticut, Fairfield County, the ACES region around New Haven, where we will build cohorts that allow districts to build internal capacity to decrease that difference between minority student percentage and minority teacher percentage.
Okay. Dr. Tracy, diversity. We hear a lot about diversity. Why does diversity matter, especially in education? And what are some of the challenges that school leaders face in ensuring diversity?
Hey, hold on, something went wrong with my program. Hold on. Don't know what just happened. Oh boy. Okay, you can hear me?
And we can hear you now.
Okay. Sorry about that
When
technology.
oh, go ahead.
So I need to say that diversity in education does matter. We have to recognize that and allow students to recognize that we are all different based on how we were acculturated, our backgrounds, education levels, economic status, religious persuasion, languages, etc. Makes us all different, but we need to celebrate our diversity as strengths and find unity in diversity. What are the things that make us so different and what makes us so unique? So diversity matters in education because it builds understanding and helps people make educated opinions and judgment. When people are more educated and embrace diversity, they learn to make judgments based on a person's actions and words and not by their parents. In our district, I know, and as leaders, we see the challenges. The challenges we have is that our workforce is predominantly not what the population looks like. And so that is creating some challenges for us, but we are doing a lot of training with our staff around culturally responsive classrooms and culturally responsive lessons. And even though they're not the color of our students, I think just by having knowledge of what we've been through other people, what the students are experiencing, that at least there can be some empathy in the workforce. We're also making sure that we're diversifying our workforce the best we can. We have so far 10 of our paraprofessionals or people of color in training with a relay group. And when they get that training, they'll be able to come back and serve us in our district. We're also even thinking of bringing back a teacher prep program where we can target our young people to go into the field of education. It is a shortage area for us. And I think it's important that students see people of color among them, Latinos, Blacks, Arabic, wherever they come from, to be in front of them as educating them. It sets up some kind of standard or example that I can reach that too. I can do that too, because here are people who are looking just like me to be able to do that. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge finding the staffing despite our recruitment efforts. It's a challenge ensuring that we are doing what is right by students. And there's a clarion call right now to diversify our workforce. And I am really challenged by that, how to do that, because you can't just put out who you have already. It's a matter of just doing things through educating those we already have in hand and making sure that new hires are representing the population of students. But it does not mean because I'm Black or because I'm Latino that I'm going to do right by children. We have to understand that. So we need to have some flexibility, some strategies that we work with teachers on to implement in their classrooms, accepting everyone's perspective, incorporating students' lives and interests. What we have done, since this pandemic, we have pushed what is called CREW. That's being done every morning before lessons are started, so we can hear the perspective of students and we can hear and sense what is going on with them. So we need to turn diversity talk on its head. While I have strong affinity with my school leaders, we all do important work and the work has never been more critical. However, the challenges we must focus on are challenges faced every day by students and families who walk through the doors, students of color, poor families, families learning English, members of varied community. I know that in New Haven, school leaders understand this. We're working to change the policy and practices to ensure that schools are equitable for the diverse population of our students. Dismantling inequities is the name of the game. How do we disrupt and dismantle inequities? That's a challenge.
All right. Thank you very much, Eileen. Superintendent Hernandez, How has your own experience as a minority and first generation born in the United States shaped your approach to being a school leader in public education?
Thank you for that question, Cynthia. And I think I'll start to respond to that question by telling you a little story. There was a little boy who was 6 years old who went to a school in Hamden, Connecticut. And on the first day of school, this is when you would go to school and you would go home to lunch, and then you would go back. And this little boy went to school and sat in class and could not understand a single word that anything what was being said to him. And this little boy went home, looked at his mom and said, "Yo no voy a regresar a esa escuela," which is in Spanish means, "I'm not going back to that school." And his mom responded, "Oh, tú vas a regresar. Oh, you're going to go back." And that little boy went back. That little boy is me. And I always carry that perspective because throughout school in Hamden in the 60s, there were not many Latinos in Hamden at that time. And my family had moved into a predominantly middle class Italian neighborhood, very typical of Hamden, Connecticut in the late 60s. And I always felt as if there was a glass ceiling as I progressed through school. And whether it was at that time, there was level classes. There were things that I was observing educationally that I couldn't really reconcile at the same time that I was learning to master the English language, which, just as an editorial note, I still continue to try to master the English language. It's a work in progress. But having said that, I think it's important to maintain that perspective, particularly as a superintendent of a diverse and growing and ever increasing diverse community, where right now 23 different languages are spoken. I have close to 40 different cultures represented in Little Branford, that not all children come to school with a level playing field, even from a simple language perspective. And not all families have the luxury or the blessings or whatever you want to call it, that they can start where there's a quiet place for children to do homework. They come from there's two parents in the household. There's no extended family. That's just, our children come from very different perspectives. And I think as a superintendent, and this is to the dean's point around decision making, when I think about the instructional staff, and I think about the faculty, and I think about the sensitivity, the empathy, the awareness, and the openness for staff to engage students that are dramatically different from the experience that they have had, it doesn't make them bad. It just gives them a blind spot that we need to provide. Like Eileen said, we need to provide targeted professional development. We need to think about that at a very, very much at a conscious level. And as a leader, I believe that does in fact shape my actions. When I start to put together budgets, when I start to make priorities for professional learning, when I start to think about hiring practices. And to Chip's point, I'm trying to tie this together, when I was listening to my colleague Chip talk about minority recruitment. We struggle in Branford with that. And I recall not too many months ago at a board meeting, I was asked, well, how are we doing with minority recruitment? And we're doing a little bit better. And I actually responded with a rhetorical question to the board, which I knew was being televised. I said, I think we need to look internally and see why aren't people that are different even considering applying to Branford? What are we giving off? What are the messages, unstated messages? And I'm not saying that as an indictment of the community. I'm stating that really more very openly as an awareness that minorities will in fact look at a community and people that have opportunity and say, maybe I don't want to work in that community. Maybe I don't want to apply. We need to break down those barriers, and we need to do that through a collaborative model where we do in fact have opportunities for crosstalk. I've often thought about having a teacher from Brantford in an exchange program with a teacher from New Haven, not a sister school program, but an exchange of teaching, so that people have their perspective is broadened. Those are some of the things that certainly as a minority superintendent, as a first generation born person in this country, that I think about are ways that start to break down barriers that we can implement in a public school setting. And I think creativity, innovation, and frankly, stick-to-itiveness. Being, to your quote, Cynthia, about where someone stands in times of challenge and controversy, we find ourselves standing right now in that moment. And I think we need to do things a little bit differently.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Hernandez. Dean Hegedus, in the College of Education, we also have issues with diversity. Can you address some of the challenges that you face as dean and what we're doing about them as a college?
Yeah, certainly. And I feel that we have been putting this forward as our priority, our strategic priority for several years. And certainly when I arrived in 2014, it became very clear to me that we need to establish an initiative that not just focuses on the recruitment and retention of minority teachers, but minority educators. We need to be sure that in our programs, such as yours in educational leadership, that we have leaders, we have a diverse group of leaders in our school systems. We have school professionals, school psychologists, counselors, and to address diversity most broadly, both racial, linguistic, social, sexual orientation. That's really important. And so our Minority Educator Initiative has brought folks together from not only within the College of Ed, but across the campus within student affairs, and also with our local leaders and our community leaders as well. And so that's become a major topic, just starting with pathways from schools, within our community on campus, our freshmen and sophomore students who are thinking about education, or may not be thinking about education. We have a very, I think it's 47% of our incoming freshmen were minority students as well. So that the campus has a very rich and diverse population of students, but that doesn't reflect in our numbers. And so that's become a major goal. We have a 5-year 2020-2025 plan that aims to at least try and match the demographics of our students with those of our schools. And that doesn't mean our Connecticut population, but at least there is a goal there. And we've certainly improved in recruiting and retaining Hispanic students, but not necessarily as well with African American and Black students. In fact, when I arrived, when I looked at the pre-EDU population, those who have said they've wanted to, are interested, and then applied to the College of Education, often in their sophomore year. And I'm just talking about the undergraduate population for a moment. When I looked at the numbers for Black students, and then I looked at the gender, there was 0 men who were in that category, 0. I thought it was going to be low, but I didn't expect to see 0, and that number said a lot. And there were just a handful of female Black students as well. So we've certainly made that very intentional. I think that word's been used today a few times, and put it in our strategic planning as well. We also have a lot of scholarships in the College of Education, and through a very generous bestow from the Carol Ann Shea family, we have the ability to award last year just under $100,000 in scholarships. And we have a group of faculty who meet to talk about that. And we have given it not just to undergrad, but graduate students, particularly part-time students. And this is often a challenge with a lot of the scholarships we have, that the money's there for full-time students, but not for part-time students. And for our graduate population, it's, you know, we have a lot of part-time students. So we've done some very specific efforts. But I also, last thing I want to say, you know, just to tell my own, very, very briefly, I'm a son of an immigrant, and you know, my father was in the Hungarian Revolution in 1956 and emigrated, and then met my mum in England, and that's where I was born. And then, you know, we had very little money, and very, you know, that could limit a lot of opportunities. But I managed to get into a school and get a scholarship that helped me along the way, because I would never have gone to college or university. And I thank that school, and I work with them now for the opportunities they've given me. So I feel we have to embrace, we have to wrap our arms around diversity, because I feel that our identities and who we are, where we're from, our backgrounds, it's something that we should be proud of, right? And when I moved here to this country in 20 years ago with my wife, you know, we had no children, but all 3 boys were born in Fall River, Massachusetts. And I just feel that, you know, this is this continuation of how we feel about our globalness, right? And we need to talk more about that. And the student leadership group that I formed as well, some of them are actually joining us today, are a wonderful, diverse group of students, again, with all the various forms of diversity. And we meet regularly, and they're actively involved in a lot of advocacy work as well on behalf of the college. I'm very proud of them, and I learn a lot from them when I meet with them. And we often talk about, you know, these issues about identity and perceptions of people. And I think that's critical as educators, that we keep that at the forefront of our programming and who we are and what we envision ourselves to be in the future. I see there are several questions that are on this theme as well, so I'm going to pause there and let you moderate the many questions that we now have. You asked for them.
Actually, that's a good point. Good time to pause, because I was looking at the first question that is from Angela Lopez Velasquez. And her question is, what would you recommend? This is to the school leaders, as well as the dean. What would you recommend as school leaders to our programs to improve the preparation of Connecticut teachers? What needs do you see from your perspective that can be addressed in education preparation programs?
So, Dr. Matt?
Yes, Dr. Tracy.
Let me say this, that it is important. My strong belief is that what we're giving, and as I would say a disciple of Southern, what we're giving to our students is not enough. I strongly believe that students need to be involved in the schools at an earlier time, even spending a whole year doing internship to actually get a sense of the environments in which they're going to work. A few weeks of student teaching, and I've always said this, a few weeks of student teaching is not enough to prepare them for the workforce in our school, the special schools that have high minority populations. I hate to use the word minority because it's sensitive to me too. But I think our students, we need to have, it's not just about the book learning, it's about the practical part of the work, that they need to have more time spent on that in order to really come in and have a sense of who our students are, what the systems and its cultures are that they're working with. I have seen many who have come in and struggled so much. The moment one of our students called them a name, the moment one of our students curse at them, it's like, I never expected that. Had they had an opportunity of spending more time and getting that, they would have been desensitized to some of those things and not seeing that's something that we have to suspend a child for because they curse at you or anything like that. So that's where I come from. I think the school of education could do a better job. Having gone through it, I can speak frankly, could do a better job at preparation in that respect.
Okay.
And Cynthia, if I may just pick up on what Eileen has indicated, because the whole concept of having students experience education from a family systems perspective, so that the pedagogy And the teaching and learning, I think the universities are doing a very good job with that. And the obvious thing, okay, teaching from home or integrating technology as an accelerator to the learning process. That's all funded. That's all well and good. But fundamentally, we still need to focus on the relationship and understanding some of the dynamics that are taking place in schools. And if we think about Senge's work and systems work, so that people really understand that, because that is a pathway, because oftentimes we never get to the teaching and learning at a rigorous level because we're stifled by something that could have been avoided or could have been addressed in a very, very proactive, systematic way. And really, it speaks about behavior or things that people did not expect that they would see in the profession, but in fact, they do see in the profession, but now need a skill set and how to address that so that they can move forward. And I think that's what Eileen was referencing. And I see that. I see that not only with new teachers, I see that, back to my original question, in a community with changing students and changing needs. Sometimes even staff that have been doing this for a while need a level of professional development in order to not get stymied by that.
Absolutely, which takes us to the next question from Dr. Ella McGee. How can we target old education mindsets so that they are open to new ideas, change, and diversity? How can we target? I can't do.
I said, give them a workbook. No.
What will they do with it? Anyone want to respond to that? How can we target old mindsets?
I think it has to be through a lot of communication, conversation, to get out of that. And we talk about courageous conversations, whatever the topic is, to get that mindset change and to have dialogue with each other. Sometimes we just read a book but we're not having those face-to-face dialogue with people. We can't learn so much from books, but I have learned a great deal from conversation with people, get their truth, where they are, and move from that perspective.
Yeah, I think the role of the campus, our university, and the College of Ed in that is critical as well. That we can create those safe spaces to have those conversations. Jim Barber and myself established a couple of sessions a few years ago called Why Teach, and that was a response to hearing a lot of educators, Black and African American teachers, particularly, not feeling that they want to encourage future teachers into the profession. We were like, let's talk about that. What is going on, again, from their mindset and their perspective? Many of them saying it's a very different job than when they first started 25 years ago. So our response was to say, well, let us have that space to talk, as you say, Dr. Tracy. Let us have that space. And what better place than a university, where universities are there to, establish these dialogues, to be critical, to engage in very rich discussion as we're having today. And as I said a moment ago, we're places where knowledge is invented and created. So we should be able to also establish new mindsets. And that's something I've seen. I like the word mindset. I use it a lot myself. How do we shift mindsets? How do we shift perceptions around? So that is, building on what you just said, Dr. Tracy, I feel that is our role as well. It's a necessity. It isn't just something that we do to organize events. It's critical, I think, in how we do business.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. This is from Brett. And it's to the entire panel, as the current administration is eliminating cultural training and equity programs across various industries in the United States, how are you keeping your districts updated on cultural trainings, programs, and preparedness? Very good question.
Good question. Chip, are you going at that or?
There's the political question of the day, right?
I've gotten in late on the last couple ones. I'll go in early on this one. So I think that, and eliminating cultural training. So, and not that I've really seen that, but I would say that one of the positives in school districts is that while I don't think that the creation of a position always addresses issues, you know, what we've heard a lot here is the courageous conversations, what I drill down to building empathy, right? When you talk about old mindsets, there needs to be some understanding of empathy, some understanding that social emotional learning is not an add-on to the curriculum. It's how kids learn. So it can't be an add-on, and so many experienced staff members really feel that it's an add-on. So I think in terms of how we address the cultural training and equity programs, some schools or districts are creating a position to emphasize the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But aside from that, we're getting to those harder conversations because it's hard to find a district right now that doesn't have an internal committee that is devoted to examining policies and critical issues and the processes that exist to make sure that they do have a social justice focus. And so those individual experiences might be being replaced by an overall emphasis in all the work that gets done in a district.
And Chip, and I would add the whole adult learning theory and how adults learn. The days of workshops having to do with culturally responsive teaching, where teachers would go away and attend a workshop and then be expected to return and apply that. Research has shown that job embedded professional development is the best form of doing that. So to me, at least in Brantford, the work that we are engaged in is about embracing a growth mindset, something that we were just talking about earlier, and really embracing a mindset that incorporates and integrates culturally responsive teaching, incorporates issues of social justice. We have the standards that we need to teach to, but the standards does not tell us how we have to teach that. And the how and the approach, the pedagogy that we do that by is the essential question that we need to engage in. And that we need to do as a district, because that now starts to shift the culture of the district. That is hard work. And the most expensive piece of that is the time that we are willing to put into it and the persistence. We need to be stubborn with that. And if we're stubborn with that, I think we will have very good outcomes.
All right, thank you very much. The last round of questions, I'll start with you, Dr. Dumais. What are some of the equity challenges that the recent influx of state-funded technology has solved and hasn't solved?
Well, thank you, Cynthia. Great question. And I think there's actually in the chat, Denver Fowler asked something related to that. So this might answer that as well. People might be aware that under Everyone Learns initiative, the state of Connecticut distributed 81,000 computers to students, over 12,000 hotspots for internet access, 1,000 connections for high-speed internet access, and more than 200 library access points to improve access. If you're well-versed, or any versed actually, in the use of technology in schools, you know that throwing equipment at the problem generally unearths the real issue and doesn't solve the actual problem. So as Dr. Tracy was indicating before, surfacing inequities really exploded when the devices were delivered to districts, exposing gaps that I think people thought might be there, But since they were based on self-reporting and other pieces, and there's an embarrassment aspect of saying I don't have internet access, and so I think that the data really wasn't all that clear. And what we're seeing is that this influx of equipment has helped tremendously, and at the same time, it has surfaced a whole number of other inequities. So I want to give a shout out to Southern and the city of New Haven, because there's across the world, universities participate in a program that allows them to use internet access on their campus. The wireless access is called EduRoam. And so it's not like going to Starbucks and logging onto the internet, because you're actually logging onto your home district, believe it or not. But the Connecticut Commission for Educational Technology and CEN has been working with towns in Connecticut and universities to allow students to access EduRoam, which means that a New Haven student right now, New Haven is the first city in Connecticut to do it. A student in New Haven can get onto the university internet, and it gives real data about who's logging on, where they're logging on, when they're logging on, where they need access, where the gaps are. And CEN and CET are currently working with Middletown, Bridgeport, Hartford, Waterbury, all areas that have a high density of students that are missing out on access, and a high density of higher ed where they can access the internet through EduRoam at these facilities. So while gaps have definitely been surfaced, I think also opportunities came out. Opportunities with curriculum, you know, the call for a common curriculum to allow the digital access across the state, you know, while moving to remote and taking advantage of other things certainly created a lot of problems. It also created a lot of, you don't have an excuse for not trying it anymore, because we just saw that it worked in some capacity. And so we're excited about that.
All right, thank you very much, Chip. Dr. Tracy,
Yes.
race has permeated political dialogue for centuries. And yet we just recently, in recent days, we've seen a lot of protests, and we're always reminded of the problems of race. We now see calls for defunding of the police, Black Lives Matter protests escalating. How can school leaders seize these moments to encourage courageous conversations about race? Or, Eileen, does it really matter?
Does it really matter? Okay, thank you, Dr. McDaniels. And before I answer that question, let me add to what Chip had said. We have put 16 mesh networks on 16 schools in New Haven to go deep into the community to provide internet access for our families. So that's in addition. So those are some of the creativity we're talking about to make sure there's no excuse. But move on to this race business. Every one of us on this panel knows that race is a social construct because there's only one human family. However, there are different ethnic groups within that one human family. Man has created this social construct for the sheer reason of showing separation and creating somewhat of I am up there, you're down there mentality. And this is what is causing the problem, not only here in the United States, but in other places. Once we start dividing people up in color of their skin or education or all these other things that we put in place, we are the ones who are doing this to ourselves. The change about race and racism or whatever we call it has to come from the heart. No laws can be enacted to change man's heart. It has to be a heart change for people to realize that we are all different. We all have different needs, but we are same. And so I start out with that. The needle has moved a little bit in the United States, but it is because of laws why certain things are kept on the lid, and that's a problem. The recent protests showed that things were steaming and boiling, and now the pot has boiled over again. In the 60s it happened, And now we see the same thing. Martin Luther King fought for all this thing to get rid of this racial or cultural inequities that we have. And we're seeing it again in 2020. The question is, why? Why didn't it go away after so many hundreds of years? Why is it still lingering? Again, I pinpoint the heart is still not changed. And only that can change how people think about people. In New Haven Public Schools, we have started to engage in what we call courageous conversations. Many find it uncomfortable. From our executive team to teacher groups, to student groups, to PTOs, in all corners and at all levels, we're engaging in this important dialogue, and more than that, putting actions in place to combat systemic racism. The color of my skin should not matter. I'm going to repeat that. The color of my skin should not matter. But in the eyes of some, it does matter. They see my color before they see me. They see my students' color before they see them. And that makes for some of the problems we have. I could go back when I went to Southern Connecticut State University back in the 90s. I was the only Black student in some of my classes, the only Black student. And was there a feeling of discomfort? Yes, there was a feeling of discomfort. Because I'm saying, why is it just me sitting in these classes? And you would see you're being shunned by people. Not only that, my accent was so thick. Yes, is that a joke? My accent was so thick because here I am just coming from the islands, and then people start telling me, I don't understand what you're saying and you're speaking fast, and I had to stop them. Or they start correcting some of the way I accent my syllables. I started correcting them and said, I am British oriented. So Steve, I'm British oriented. Of course, I'm going to accent my syllables differently. But I'm just pointing these things out to see how people look at you in so many different ways and use that to judge who you are as an individual. So the color of your skin should not matter. We know that data tells us that we have an opportunity gap by defined ethnic groups, people of color, and the only way to eliminate that gap is to chip away at it every turn. We're leading in this area and welcome other community members who want to help us change curriculum, change policies and practices to join us. We started what is called a District Equity Leadership Team, which is called DELT, and we're holding advisory meetings. We partnered with the whole Housing Authority recently and several districts in what is called an equity collaborative to be agents of continuous change. So until we change as leaders and stop using color of skin to judge who we are, it is not going to change here in the United States or elsewhere. Don't judge me because of the color of my skin.
Wow. Thank you very much for that powerful response. Superintendent Hernandez, as a retired military officer, I believe you retired as Lieutenant Colonel?
I did.
All right. And public official, has your idea of equity evolved?
I would say the short answer, absolutely. And I think that's partly because of my experience, but primarily because of my time on this earth and my ability to be open to see things and to experience things and to integrate my experiences and to be surrounded by people that have taught me and that have opened up my eyes to different things. But certainly when I think back to my young military days, I can't say that equity was something that was in my mind as a young military officer. Service and service to something other than you was very, very much in my mind. And that started to evolve. The notion of service to others, to me, became a bridge to advocacy and equity issues in public education. So that's what I, in my lifetime, I feel very blessed that I've been able to have a front row seat to some pretty incredible things in history that have really caused me to think deeply, not only about my own experience, about how I choose to live my life and how I choose to give back to a community to make it better, to pave it forward. And that to me is, when I think of service, again, it was a pathway to having this advocacy and this awareness around equity. And I chose public education as the venue by which I can, the talents that God has given me, those limited talents, to use those in that venue. So I would say yes, it is certainly, and my parents also, both are deceased, and recently, my parents also gave me the courage to do that. If I can look at my parents and think of a young couple leaving a country that was under political tumult with a baby and not knowing the language, who am I to lament because I'm asked to learn a second language, and I have some struggles. And my parents taught me never to look down, always to look forward, and always to have the courage and of your convictions. And I think if we can do that with our children, and we can do that in a way understanding that everybody gets to where they hopefully are destined to arrive, but through a different path. Our role as educators, decision makers, is to ensure that everybody has that opportunity. If not, then we're not approaching the work in a way that we should be.
Thank you very much, Hamlet, for that very profound and moving testimonial. Dean Hegedus, we're running short of time, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to the last set of questions. Is there anything you would like to add?
Not much, because I mean, very profound. What more can I add? Very profound personal statements. I really very much appreciate our esteemed colleagues and their personal testimonials, as you've said. One of the major roles for us as a College of Ed is what I've said previously, is to maintain that space to continue with events like this, to establish spaces, courageous conversations, to dialogue across the communities that we are, and to be sure that we have, a balanced dialogue as well. And, that involves sometimes hearing things that we don't always agree with. And that's part of the Academy's role. And to be open and flexible, and to continue to do that work. It can only be done through partnerships and what I tend to call a pre-K 20 plus spectrum, right? This is continuous from preschool, from birth through elementary, secondary, tertiary education. I think that's critical. I was just thinking about as someone who's spent a lot of his career on building systems and technologies to try and reduce achievement gaps and to address the inequities that we have, particularly in mathematics classrooms. One thing that came to mind was when Chip was speaking, was about, it's one thing to have policy or legislation or an executive order that allows certain the release of certain funds for technologies, but that isn't, the technologies should be a way towards a solution, not further exacerbate the inequities that we see, and that can often occur. So in my work, I recall Anne Brown's caution when she said with the use of technology, there can be fatal mutations, where when we try and implement something with all good intent, it actually gets implemented in a wrong way. And we always have to look very carefully at fidelity of implementation. So that takes, again, it's not just a higher ed coming in, dropping something in and then leaving that system. It's a sustained, systemic, thoughtful, research-based and courageous innovative experience that will address some of these. And I do see a very positive role for technology by looking at the affordances of technology. And we've got some good work going on, I think, with the college and some of our partners, both in New Haven and the surrounding districts. So I don't have anything much more to say apart from I hope we can continue to do this, to have these conversations, to have these outreaches to our alumni as well. And that's it really. I'm also wary that we have a few more questions, and I hope we have a few more moments to address them. So I'm going to stop there.
Okay, we seem to be 1:19. We are to conclude at 1:15, so we're a little over. Do we have additional time, or must we wrap it up? Doreen?
Yep, we can proceed.
Okay, all right, so let's take a few more questions. This one, what are districts doing to reduce the racial isolation that exists within the teaching profession? Schools used to conduct urban-suburban exchanges for students. What potential is there for districts to conduct exchanges for teachers? I'm thinking, yeah. Eileen, go ahead. I can see your eager to answer. Yeah.
That's a great question.
I think it's,
we have invested in buses to transport students from about 40 or 30 something different districts around us. So we're looking at the integration of students. That's a great question, because we also know that I know when I was growing up, we have people going to London, what have you, and they come to us for that type of exchange. That's a great idea. I think that's a great idea for us to probably explore and see if that actually works.
I'm going to embarrass him. That's coming from one of your teachers who's also on my student leadership group.
No, but I'm saying that's a great question. That is something that we could explore to share experiences across districts.
I think
if it is possible on the teachers' unions. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think, and Eileen, I think it's a great idea, because right now there's Project Open, the Choice Program, the Open Choice Program, where municipalities are exchanging students to break down economic, racial, and ethnic isolation. But I have found that adults can benefit from that. So if there was ever to be a structured program where we would be able to exchange teachers, and I referenced this earlier, I actually think about that often, about having teachers that have spent their career in a district like Brantford to go into a different district for a year. And because I think it just makes us better professionals. It gives us a level of credibility that we are truly here for for all children, and not just a zip code. And I was monitoring the chat, and there was something about, what are leaders doing to address, the outcomes or the disparate outcomes of education based on zip codes. I think that's a very, very big issue in public education, and I think we need to tackle that, but we can't just always approach it from a student's perspective. The adults need to do something also. And labor unions, as we all know, sometimes can get in the way of that, but it's still worth doing and approaching that work.
When I was in Massachusetts, in my area around at UMass, we had the largest Cape Verdean community outside of Cape Verde. And we used to send actually teachers from there to Cape Verde and then come back. So they went from sort of local, global, local perspective. We've certainly also established, prior to the hurricane, we have a strong partnership with various universities in Puerto Rico, and have done, some of our students have gone there too. So I think it's back to this, Dr. Tracy's point about more experience. It isn't always just in schools locally, it can be schools globally as well, to enhance that global perspective, which really is, I think, deeply intertwined with these issues around race and diversity. So, again, I think that's another role where, higher ed and colleges of ed can really help with that.
Okay, one final question. My experience in 30 years of teaching motivated me to write and advocate for children. Why don't we talk about white racism in our schools and curriculum? We blame trauma and poverty of our students for gaps rather than our impoverished and traumatized democracy. I work in a town that spent time and money investigating residency of students of color, which reinforced existing racism of our town. Who wants to respond to that? Which school leader?
Well, I'm happy to start.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm happy to start because when I was the assistant superintendent in Hamden, and Hamden was dealing, the southern part of Hamden, the part of Hamden where I grew up in, was experiencing a change in demographics, and more and more African-American families and Black families were moving in. The proverbial, oh, they don't live in Hamden. They must be cheating the system, trying to get in. I was tasked one summer to look at all of the residencies. And frankly, what I found is that the majority of them were very, very legitimate. There were families that were either doubling up. They weren't there just for the sole purpose of a public education. They weren't trying to game the system, but there was an undercurrent. And frankly, I'm a little bit embarrassed because I was part of the system. I was investigating this in my role as an assistant superintendent. But my ultimate conclusion was that was not an issue of race from my perspective. I was just investigating residency pieces. But when I'm now removed from that and I look at it from the 100,000-foot view, I can certainly understand how that actually was fueling a sense of, racism, or we don't want those people in this town. That's a real issue. I think that's a real issue. And I think, I don't know if it was Chip or the dean or somebody said it here, we need to have that type of a courageous conversation. What was the motivating factor to actually engage in that type of behavior and to direct district resources to do that? That's the courageous conversation,
So I understand that is something that school districts need to look into, because, for example, when you have, we have special education students a lot in our district. Some of them may be coming from neighboring towns. We're going to try to find out where you are coming from, because it does cost the district extra dollars. So I could understand why they're tracing down where they're coming from if they really are residents of the community, because it does cost money and extra funding to do the work they do. And I don't think it's all about racism in some of the places, but it's more financial, economic piece in their mix. Because even in New Haven, we have several people coming in, and later on when we were supposed to sending our accounts to get reimbursed, we find out that these people were really not a part of New Haven. So we have actually started trying to verify where you actually do live, whether you're white, it didn't matter. But having said that too, I have the experience of back in the early 80s, moving into a certain neighborhood, purchased a home in a certain neighborhood. And when my children actually enrolled in school, actually I sent them to school when they were first graders. I actually did not like to get them out before they were ready to be out there. So when my kids went to school, they were told that they were not this school system's material. It burns my heart for that. Then they were put in remedial classes. And then later on, when I go for report conferences and, oh, pleasure to have, I had to get really nasty. I don't care if they're a pleasure to have. Please tell me how they're doing academically and otherwise. right? And then later on, when I revealed who I was, it was like a backup. But it should not matter who I am. All students should be educated no matter where they are, and they should not be defining them by their zip code or the color of their skin. And that is why, Hamlet, some teachers are weary of going into districts that are predominantly Caucasian to work, especially minority teachers, because they're afraid of facing that type of behavior,
Right.
whether overt or covert. They're afraid of those things. That's why, Dean, some students of color are afraid of going to Southern Connecticut State University. They'd rather go to HBCUs where they feel more comfortable.
Mm.
There are some of the things that we have to look at. Jim Barber and I worked at Southern. I worked with Southern for a good 30 years. I didn't put that in my but I worked when Jim Barber recruited me, and I worked as, teaching developmental reading and graduate reading courses, and also spend an inordinate amount of time with Jim Barber every summer, bringing in students of color into the campus and encouraging them to be teachers and all these things we encourage them to be. These were students who, if you were going by their SAT scores, we would not have accepted them, but they have come out to be lawyers, doctors, counselors, teachers, administrators, giving students a second chance. So I must say kudos to Southern for having that. I'm not sure if it's still going, but for 30 years, I did that with Jim Barber. So again, to say that racism, you just have to watch people's attitude towards you when you go into a room. Even now it's happening. I don't have to tell anyone that I'm a superintendent of New Haven Public Schools, but you see their attitude. And after they learn that you are that, then the attitude change. Why should it change? Why does it matter? I rest my case.
Okay, unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I just want to extend my heartfelt appreciation to all of you school leaders for your wisdom, experiences, and all that you are continuing to do to improve education for our students. And I also want to thank Dean Hegedus for sponsoring this. This is the first event, and there will be several more in the next few months. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dean Hegedus for final thoughts. Stephen.
So thank you, Dr. McDaniels, and I will just take 30 seconds. Again, thank you, each one of you. You're very, it has been a great conversation. You are leaders, you are friends, and I really value and respect each one of you. Thank you so much for this event today. And many people are wanting this conversation to continue. So you're still working for us, Dr. Tracy. Our next event will be on December 4th, and our leaders of our Autism Center will be engaged in a dialogue with Dr. McDaniels, and that is on the intersection of race and autism, and we hope that we will see you back there again. Thank you all. Have a great weekend, and take care.